The rain came down like a waterfall, so thick and heavy that Vivian Harper could not see anything more than a few feet in front of her. Each step felt like stomping through wet cement, her ankles swollen, aching, burning with every movement. Her 8-month belly dragged her forward, and then a contraction tore through her lower abdomen and made her stumble. She clung to the iron bars of the gate, trembling fingers tightening around cold, slick metal. This was the end of the line, a true dead end. Behind her was a long chain of doors slammed shut. 6 shelters, all full. 11 calls to friends, not one answered. 3 nights sleeping under an overpass after her old car was towed because she could not pay the fines. And now, holding a crumpled piece of paper, a homeless man had shoved into her hand with a whispered warning. "The boss lives here. Sometimes he helps people." Vivian stood in front of the towering iron gate of the darkest mansion she had ever seen in her life. Beyond the gate, a Gothic estate rose up in the night. Only a few windows leaked a weak yellow light. Stone statues guarded the entrance like silent ghosts. The spiked iron fence reached into the sky like the fingers of death. This was the territory of Marcus Castellano, the most notorious mafia boss in Chicago, and she was about to fall to her knees and beg a man the entire city feared. Vivian knew this could be a deadly mistake, but she had no other choice. Another contraction hit. Stronger this time. Vivian doubled over, panting. Her pale blue maternity dress, the only beautiful thing she still owned, had been soaked through for a long time. Rain ran down her face and mixed with tears she had been holding back for hours. She pressed the buzzer with shaking fingers. No answer. She pressed it again, longer this time, leaning her weight into the gate so she would not collapse. Her vision began to blur. The baby kicked hard, as if protesting what was happening to them. Vivian's knees started to give. "Please," she whispered into the intercom, her voice breaking. "Please, my baby. Something is wrong." The world tilted. Vivian felt herself sliding down the gate as her body finally surrendered. Concrete rushed up toward her as darkness crawled in from the edges of her sight. Her last thought, before everything sank into black, was a desperate prayer. "Please, someone, anyone, find me before it's too late." The gate gave a harsh metallic groan and began to open slowly. But Vivian did not hear it. She did not see the tall man in the black suit step out of the shadows, the scar along his jaw stark under a flash of lightning. She did not hear his low voice ordering his men to carry her inside. She did not feel the strong arms lifting her, or the sharp, icy stare that suddenly softened when it fell on her pregnant belly. All she knew was the cold, the pain, and the terror that she had failed her child before she ever had the chance to hold that baby in her arms. And she had no idea that the most ruthless mafia boss in Chicago had just seen in her the shadow of the woman he lost 5 years ago. The woman who went to the grave carrying his unborn child. If this story touched your heart, please tap like to support the channel. Don't forget to share it with anyone who needs the reminder that hope still exists in the darkest places. And if you want to follow Vivian's journey, subscribe now so you won't miss what happens next. The first thing Vivian felt was softness. Not the icy concrete she remembered at the end, but something like a cloud holding her up. The second thing was warmth, a gentle heat wrapping around her like an invisible blanket. The third thing was the steady beep of a machine somewhere very close. Her eyes opened. She blinked in the dim light. A ceiling rose high above her, carved with intricate patterns. Deep red velvet curtains sealed the windows shut. Dark wood furniture, antique and expensive in a way Vivian had never seen anything like in her life. She was lying on a massive bed with cream-colored sheets. Around her were medical devices. An IV line ran into her arm. A heart monitor flashed green numbers. Then memory slammed into her like a cold wave. The baby. Vivian sucked in a sharp breath, both hands flying to her belly. Her heart seemed to stop for a beat, until she felt the familiar kick from inside. Strong. Alive. The baby was still here. The baby was still all right. Tears spilled over. This time, tears of overwhelming relief. "Your child is fine." The voice made Vivian flinch. She turned her head toward the door, where a man stood. He looked about 40, salt and pepper hair, a sharp, angular face with eyes as keen as blades. A perfectly tailored black suit fit his tall frame, and something in the way he stood, in the way he looked at her, told Vivian at once that he was not an ordinary man. "A doctor examined you all through the night," the man continued, his voice low and even, without emotion. "Both you and the baby are stable. Your blood pressure has come down. You were exhausted, severely dehydrated, and malnourished. But nothing is life-threatening." Vivian swallowed, her throat dry and raw. "Where am I?" she whispered. "The Castellano estate," the man answered without hesitation. "You collapsed at my boss's gate last night. He ordered that you be brought inside." Castellano. The name rang in Vivian's head like an alarm. She remembered the crumpled paper. She remembered the homeless man's whisper under the bridge. The boss lives here. Sometimes he helps people. She had been so desperate she believed a stranger and knocked on the door of the Mafia's lair. "Who are you?" Vivian asked, her voice trembling. "Leo Marchetti," the man said. "Mr. Castellano's assistant." Vivian tried to sit up, but her body rebelled. Dizziness hit hard, forcing her back down. Leo did not move to help her. He did not look worried. He only stood there, watching with eyes like ice. "I need to leave," Vivian said, even though she knew how meaningless it sounded. "I can't stay here. I don't have money to pay for." "You are not going anywhere," Leo cut in, his tone not harsh, but leaving no room for argument. "Not in this condition. Not when you could go into labor at any moment. And you do not owe anyone anything. Not yet." That last phrase hung in the air like a quiet threat. Vivian looked around the luxurious room, at the expensive medical equipment, at the designer suit on the man in front of her. She knew where she was. She knew men like Marcus Castellano never helped anyone without a reason. She knew stepping into this world could be the biggest mistake of her life. But she also knew that outside, she had nothing. No home, no money, no family, no friends, only cold streets and death waiting. Here, at least her baby was safe. At least for this moment. "Your boss," Vivian said slowly. "What does he want from me?" Leo looked at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then he turned toward the door. "He will tell you himself," Leo said before stepping out. When he is ready. The heavy wooden door closed with a soft click. But to Vivian it sounded like the bolt of a prison. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling her daughter move inside. "Mom doesn't know what she's doing," she whispered to the unborn baby. "But Mom will protect you, no matter what it costs." Outside the window, the rain was still falling. And inside this dark Gothic mansion, Vivian Harper wondered for the first time whether she had just been saved, or whether she had stepped into a trap even more terrifying than the darkness outside. 2 days passed in a silence that felt frightening. Vivian lay on the luxurious bed. A nurse checked on her every few hours. Hot meals arrived 3 times a day. She was cared for like an honored guest. But she knew she was not a guest. She was a stranger who had collapsed at the gate of the most notorious mafia boss in Chicago. And sooner or later, she would have to face him. That moment came on the afternoon of the 3rd day. The door opened without a sound, and Vivian knew at once the person stepping inside was not Leo, not a nurse, not anyone she had seen in the past 2 days. The air in the room seemed to thicken, heavier, colder. She slowly lifted her head, and for the first time, she saw Marcus Castellano. He was taller than she expected, more solid, more dangerous. Black hair, touched with silver at the temples, a face that looked carved from granite, sharp and angular. Steel gray eyes, cold as a Chicago winter, fixed on her without a blink. A faint scar ran along the left side of his jaw, from near his ear to near his chin, a mark from a life Vivian did not dare imagine. A black 3-piece suit fit his broad frame perfectly, and the way he stood, the way he looked at her, carried a kind of power that needed no words. Vivian felt her heart pounding against her ribs. Instinct told her to look away, to lower her head, to be obedient. But another part of her, the part that had survived the hell of the past months, refused to bend. She met his gaze and held it. Marcus stepped into the room, slow and deliberate, like a panther studying its prey. He did not speak for a long time. He only stood there, looking her over from head to toe, then letting his gaze settle on her 8-month belly. Something flickered in his eyes. Only a second. So brief Vivian could not tell if she imagined it. Then the coldness returned as if it had never left. "What is your name?" His voice was low and rough, not loud, but heavy enough to demand attention. "Vivian. Vivian Harper. What were you doing at my gate?" Vivian drew in a deep breath. She could have lied. She could have made up a story that sounded prettier, sadder, easier to accept. But looking into those steel gray eyes, she knew Marcus Castellano was the kind of man who could see straight through lies, and lying to him might be the last thing she ever did. "I had nowhere else to go," she said, her voice shaking but clear. 6 shelters were full. My friends did not answer. My family cut me off. I slept under a bridge for 3 nights before a homeless man gave me this address and told me the boss here sometimes helps people. She stopped and swallowed. "I know who you are. I know this could be a mistake, but I had no other choice." Marcus did not react. His face was a stone wall, nothing slipping through. "Where is the baby's father?" The question cut like a blade into an unhealed wound. Vivian felt her throat tighten, but she did not let herself cry. "Not in front of this man. He left when I told him I was pregnant," she said, her voice hardening. "He told me to get an abortion or disappear. I chose to keep my baby, and I lost everything because of that choice. Your family. My parents said if I didn't give up the baby, I was no longer their daughter. Vivian lifted her chin higher, even with the pain tearing through her chest. I chose my child. Silence. Marcus watched her as if he were digging down into her soul, searching for falsehood, for shadows, for anything that proved she was lying. Vivian did not know what he found, but after a long, suffocating moment, he gave a small nod, as if he had reached some decision. You know who I am, Marcus said. It was a statement, not a question. You know what people say about me. Yes, and you still came here. I told you, Vivian answered, her voice steady now. I had no other choice. Marcus studied her a moment longer. Then he turned toward the door, took a few steps, and stopped without looking back. Leo will explain the rules to you, he said. Follow them, and you will be safe here. Break them. He let the sentence hang, not needing to finish it. Then he walked out. The door closed behind him. Vivian was left alone with her heart racing and questions bigger than ever. Marcus Castellano had just allowed her to stay. But why? What did he want? And that brief glance, that painful flicker when his eyes dropped to her belly. That fraction of a second, what was it hiding? Vivian did not know, but she had a feeling the answer would change everything. Leo returned the next morning, when the weak sunlight had just begun to slip through a narrow gap in the deep red velvet curtains. He carried a tray of tea and toast, set it on the table beside the bed with the precision of a man accustomed to serving, yet never lowering himself. Vivian sat up. Her body felt much stronger after days of care, even though her mind was still spinning from the meeting the day before. Mr. Castellano has decided, Leo said, his voice as cold as it had been the first time. You are permitted to stay here until you deliver your child. A wave of relief washed through Vivian, but she knew better than to celebrate too soon. Nothing in this world was free, especially not in the world of men like Marcus Castellano. What are the conditions? She asked directly. Leo looked at her, a flicker of surprise passing through his eyes, as if he had not expected her to be smart enough to ask that. 2 conditions. First, you will not ask anything about Mr. Castellano's business. Not him, not me, not anyone in this estate. Whatever you see, whatever you hear, you forget it. Do you understand? Vivian nodded. That was not difficult. She did not want to know Mafia business. The less she knew, the safer she would be. Second, Leo continued, you will not leave the designated area. You will stay in the guest house behind the mansion. There is a private garden if you want fresh air, but you will not enter the main house unless invited, and you will absolutely not leave the gate. For any reason, I'm a prisoner, Vivian said. Not to complain, only stating the truth. Leo tilted his head, his gaze sharp. You are a protected guest. There are people out there who would do anything to hurt Mr. Castellano, including using an innocent pregnant woman living on his property. These rules are not only to protect him, they are also to protect you. Vivian had not thought of that. She had been so focused on the danger Marcus represented that she had forgotten there could be other dangers too. Enemies willing to use her as a piece on a board she did not understand. I understand, she said. I will comply. Good. Leo stood. Pack your things. Not that you have much to pack. I'll take you to the guest house in 1 hour. He left, and Vivian looked down at her pale blue maternity dress, washed and neatly folded on the chair. That was all she had. One dress. No identification, because her wallet had been gone for a long time. No money, no phone, nothing at all, except the child growing inside her. The guest house was nothing like Vivian had imagined. She had expected a small room tucked away somewhere, but instead it was a charming little house set in the garden behind the mansion. 2 stories, whitewashed walls, large windows looking out over flower beds and a fountain. Inside there was a living room, a small kitchen, and an upstairs bedroom with a soft double bed, and a closet that someone had already filled with brand new maternity clothes, the tags still on. Vivian stood in the middle of the living room and did not know what she was supposed to feel. Gratitude, fear, confusion, all of it tangled together into a knot she could not untie. Someone will bring you meals 3 times a day, Leo said from the doorway. A doctor will come twice a week to check on you. If you need anything, there is a call button beside the bed. Someone will come within a few minutes. Why is he doing all this? Vivian asked, unable to hold it in any longer. Mr. Castellano. Why is he helping me? He doesn't know who I am. I have nothing to give back. Leo stopped at the threshold. For the first time, Vivian saw something different in his eyes. Not coldness. Something that looked almost like sorrow. There are questions, he said slowly, that you should let him answer himself, if he wants to. Then he left, and Vivian was alone in the little house in the garden of the Mafia boss. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling her daughter move inside, and for the first time in months, she let out a long breath that was not filled with immediate terror. She was still inside Mafia territory. She still did not know what the future would bring, but at least, in this moment, she and her daughter were safe. And sometimes, that was all a mother could ask for. In the first days at the guest house, Vivian mostly rested, following the doctor's orders, but as her strength returned, curiosity began to wake up. She did not break the rules. She did not step into the main house. She did not try to leave the gate. But from the upstairs bedroom window, from the stone bench in the small garden, she could see plenty. And what she saw made her understand that the world she had stepped into was far more complicated than she had imagined. Every day, glossy black cars passed through the gate, men in black suits, faces like ice, moved with the alertness of wolves guarding their territory. They never looked toward the guest house, as if Vivian did not exist, as if she were only an invisible ghost in the garden. She watched them bend at the waist when Marcus walked by. She watched them fall silent when he spoke. She saw absolute fear in their eyes. Marcus Castellano was not only their boss, he was their king. Meetings took place in the main house, sometimes lasting deep into the night. Vivian could see shadows through the lit windows. She could hear low voices drifting out into the quiet. And sometimes, she heard other sounds. Screams from the basement, begging, then silence. Those sounds froze her blood. They forced her to remind herself that the man who had saved her was also a man capable of terrible things she could not bear to imagine. She learned to pretend she had not heard. She learned to look away. She learned to convince herself it was not her business. But then she began to see other things too. Things that did not fit the image of a ruthless mafia boss she had built in her mind. One afternoon, as Vivian sat in the garden, she saw a middle-aged woman walk through the gate with 3 children. The woman did not look afraid. She did not bow. She did not lower her eyes. She walked straight into the main house as if it were the most normal thing in the world. About an hour later, she came back out holding a thick envelope, her eyes wet with tears, yet a grateful smile on her lips. Vivian did not understand what had happened until she overheard a conversation between 2 gardeners. Mrs. Martinez came again asking for money for her son's surgery, one of them said. Did the boss help? The other asked. Of course. He always helps. Any family in the neighborhood that needs money for their children, he never says no. Vivian sat there, not knowing what to think. A mafia boss paying for children's surgery. It did not make sense beside the monster she had pictured in her head. And then she discovered more. Marcus Castellano had iron rules no one was allowed to break. No drug business. Never. That was the red line, and anyone who crossed it would pay with their life. Vivian heard this from a maid who thought no one was listening. His father died because of drugs, the maid whispered to a coworker. Not from using them, but because he was poisoned by a rival drug gang. After that, Mr. Castellano swore he would never touch that stuff, and anyone who brings drugs into his territory disappears. Vivian began to look at Marcus with different eyes. Not blind fear, not simple judgment. He was a criminal, that could not be denied. But he was also a man with his own principles, his own lines, his own pain she had only begun to see. This world was not black and white the way she had once believed. It was made of endless shades of gray, where evil and good braided together in ways she could not fully understand. And Marcus Castellano, the man she had thought was the living face of darkness, turned out to have hidden beams of light inside him. She did not know whether that made anything better or worse. She only knew that with each passing day, it became harder to place him into any single box in her mind. And that, in a strange way, made her want to know more. It started in the 2nd week. Vivian was sitting alone in the small dining room of the guest house, eating the dinner a servant had just brought in, when the door opened and Marcus walked in. He did not say a word. He only pulled out a chair and sat across from her, and another servant appeared right behind him with his meal. Vivian stared at him, so shocked she forgot to chew. Marcus did not explain. He simply began to eat, as if this were the most ordinary thing in the world. As if the most notorious mafia boss in Chicago routinely had dinner with strange pregnant women in his guest house. The first dinner passed in near total silence. Only the soft clink of knife and fork against porcelain, the ticking of the wall clock, and Vivian's heart pounding hard inside her chest. She did not dare speak. She did not know what to say, and Marcus seemed to have no intention of speaking either. When he finished, he stood, gave a small nod in her direction, and left without a single goodbye. The second dinner was the same, and the third. By the fourth, Vivian could not stand the heavy silence anymore. "Do you have a habit of eating in silence?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Or is this a special privilege just for me? Marcus lifted his head. Steel gray eyes met hers. A moment passed, and Vivian thought she had gone too far. Said the wrong thing. Then something happened she did not believe she would ever see. The corner of Marcus's mouth lifted, just slightly, almost imperceptible. But it was a smile, a real one. Most people don't dare speak to me unless I ask first, he said. I'm not most people, Vivian replied, and immediately wondered if she had just dug her own grave. But Marcus did not get angry. He looked at her with an expression she could not read, something between curiosity and amusement. No, he said slowly, you're not. After that, the dinners began to change. Marcus still did not talk much, but he started asking small questions. Do you like to read? Where did you grow up? What did you study in college? Simple questions, harmless questions, but each one was a small brick, building a bridge between two worlds that had no right to touch. Vivian told him about her childhood in the suburbs of Chicago, about her dream of becoming a graphic designer, about college years, when she worked part-time to pay tuition because her parents believed a daughter did not need too much education. She told him about her first job, about the little apartment she used to rent, about the ordinary life she had before everything collapsed. And Marcus listened. He truly listened, with a full, undivided attention Vivian had never received from anyone, not even Derek. In return, he began to share small pieces of himself. He liked classical music, especially Chopin. He read history books every night before bed. He taught himself to cook as a boy because his mother worked 2 jobs to keep the family afloat. Small details, nothing dramatic. Yet they sketched the outline of a man completely different from the cold mafia boss the outside world believed it knew. You know, Vivian said one evening, after Marcus mentioned he once wanted to be an architect when he was a child. You are the strangest man I have ever met. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Strange. Everyone is afraid of you. But you sit here eating dinner with me and talking about Chopin and childhood dreams. None of it makes sense. Maybe, Marcus said, his voice lowering. I don't want you to be afraid of me. The words hung between them, heavier than anything he had said before. Vivian looked at him, at those steel gray eyes that were becoming familiar now, and for the first time she saw something else there. Not coldness, not danger. Loneliness. A loneliness so deep it almost felt like something you could touch. I'm not afraid of you, she said gently. I don't know why, but I'm not. Marcus held her gaze for a long time, his eyes filled with feelings she could not name. Then he nodded once, as if she had just given him something precious. You're the first person to say that to me, he said, that I actually believe. That night, as Vivian lay in bed with her hand on her belly, she realized everything had shifted. She was no longer just a stranger Marcus had taken in out of pity, and he was no longer only the terrifying mafia boss she needed to fear. They were becoming something else. What? She did not know, but the strange warmth spreading through her chest made her both frightened and unable to stop herself from looking forward to dinner tomorrow. That night was their 12th dinner. Vivian did not count, but she realized she had begun to look forward to the sound of Marcus's footsteps each afternoon. She looked forward to the door opening, to that man walking in with his cold expression and eyes that were slowly growing warmer. They were eating butternut squash soup when Marcus set his spoon down and looked at her with an expression more serious than usual. You've never told me about the baby's father, he said. About what happened. Vivian felt her throat tighten. She had known this question would come, sooner or later. She had mentioned it in the first meeting, but she had never gone into detail, never allowed herself to relive that pain. Derek Mitchell, she began, her voice only slightly unsteady. We met almost 2 years ago. He was a lawyer at a large firm. Handsome, confident, sweet with his words. I thought he was perfect. She gave a dry, bitter little laugh. I was stupid. Marcus said nothing. He only listened with the complete attention she had come to know from him. We dated for 8 months, Vivian continued. And then I found out I was pregnant. I thought he would be happy. We had talked about the future, marriage, kids, but when I told him, she stopped and took a deep breath to steady herself. He changed completely, like I was looking at a stranger. He said I did it on purpose to trap him. He said he wasn't ready to be a father. Then he handed me money and he said, her voice broke. He said to get an abortion, or get out. The silence in the room felt heavy as lead. Vivian could not bring herself to look at Marcus, afraid of seeing judgment in his eyes, afraid of the pity she hated more than anything. I couldn't do it, she went on, her voice harder now. I couldn't kill my child just because her father was a coward. So I refused, and Derek disappeared. He blocked my number, left the city, erased every trace, as if I had never existed in his life. And your family? Marcus asked, his voice low. That was the part that hurt the most. Vivian felt tears rising, but she fought them back. My parents are very conservative. To them, getting pregnant outside marriage is the greatest shame. When I went to them for help, they said I had to give up the baby, put her up for adoption or do something else. They said if I kept her, I was no longer their daughter. She paused, and one tear slipped down her cheek anyway, no matter how hard she tried. I have a younger sister, Emma. She wanted to help me, but my parents threatened to cut her off too if she kept in contact with me. I couldn't let her lose everything because of me. Vivian wiped her tears with the back of her hand, ashamed that Marcus was seeing her like this. So I lost everything. My job, my home, my family, my friends, all because I chose to keep a baby no one wanted. A baby her own father couldn't even stand to look at. She lifted her head, ready to face whatever reaction Marcus might give her. Pity, disgust, indifference. But what she saw surprised her. There was no judgment in his eyes, no cheap pity, only a deep understanding, as if he knew exactly what it felt like to lose everything. You're stronger than you think, Marcus said, his voice unusually gentle. It takes tremendous courage to risk everything to protect a life that hasn't even entered the world yet. Never be ashamed of that. Then he stood, gave her a small nod, and left as he always did. But that night, Vivian lay in bed and cried, not from the pain of the past, but because for the first time in months, she felt like someone truly saw her. Not as a foolish girl who had ruined her own life, but as a woman who had fought to protect her child. The next morning, when Vivian woke, she saw a vase of flowers on the table beside her bed. Pure white blossoms, fresh, clean. Their soft scent filled the morning light. There was no note, no explanation, but Vivian knew exactly who they were from. She touched the delicate petals, and the first smile she had worn in months bloomed on her lips. A real smile. That night at dinner, Vivian did not know what to say about the vase of flowers. She wanted to thank Marcus, wanted to tell him how much that small gesture had meant, but when he walked in, still in his familiar black suit, with those steel-gray eyes that were so hard to read, she saw something different in him, a heaviness she had never seen before, as if he were carrying an invisible weight she was only beginning to notice. They ate in silence for a long time. Vivian did not want to push, did not want to corner him. She had learned that Marcus spoke when he was ready, and only when he was ready. So she waited, patient, while the steak on her plate slowly went cold. "Have you wondered," Marcus finally said, his voice lower than usual, "why I saved you that night?" Vivian set her knife and fork down. Yes. Marcus did not look at her. He looked out the window into the darkness, as if he were staring into another time, another life. 5 years ago, I had a woman, he said. Her name was Catherine. The name left his mouth with a tenderness Vivian had never heard in Marcus's voice, a tenderness threaded with a pain so deep it felt like it changed the air. "We were going to get married," Marcus continued, his voice steady, as if he were telling someone else's story. "She was the light of my life, the only person who saw me, truly saw me. Not the Mafia boss, not the killer, but Marcus. Just Marcus." He paused, his jaw tightening. She was pregnant. 3 months. We were going to have a child. Vivian's heart clenched. She had sensed something. She had seen the pain in his eyes whenever his gaze fell on her belly. But hearing him say it, hearing the real story, still felt like being hit in the chest. "There was a rival crew," Marcus went on, his voice growing colder, harder. "They wanted my territory. They wanted my power. And when they couldn't beat me head on, they decided to strike where I was weakest." His hands clenched on the table until his knuckles turned white. "They kidnapped Catherine. They tortured her. For 3 days. And when I finally found her," his voice broke, only for a second, before he forced it back into control with visible effort. "It was too late. Both of them. Her and our child. They were dead." Tears slid down Vivian's cheeks before she even realized she was crying. She could not imagine that kind of pain, could not understand losing the person you loved and the baby you never got to meet, all at once. She wanted to say something, to comfort him, but there were no words big enough. No words that could heal a wound that deep. "I wiped them out," Marcus said, his voice like ice. "One by one. I made them pay for what they did. But that didn't bring Catherine back. It didn't bring my child back." He finally turned and looked at Vivian, and she saw hell in his eyes. "I died that day. The human part of me. The part that could love, that could hope, that could dream. It all died with Catherine." "Marcus," Vivian whispered, not knowing what else to say. "That night, when I saw you on the camera," Marcus continued, a pregnant woman collapsing in the rain, begging for help. "I saw Catherine. I saw the child I never got to meet, and I couldn't let it happen again. Not right in front of my gate. Not when I could stop it. Silence filled the room. Vivian looked at the man sitting across from her, the most notorious Mafia boss in Chicago, and for the first time, she saw who he really was. Not a monster, not a cold-blooded criminal. A broken man, trying to keep living even though part of him had been dead for a long time. She stood, walked to him, and did something no one had likely dared to do in years. She placed her hand on his shoulder, gentle, asking for nothing, only being there. "Thank you," she said softly. "Thank you for saving us, and thank you for telling me." Marcus did not speak, but he placed his hand over hers, only for a brief moment, and in that moment Vivian felt a connection neither of them dared to name. Two broken people finding each other in the dark, beginning, slowly, to see the light. In the days after the night Marcus told her about Catherine, everything between them changed in a way that was subtle, almost impossible to put into words. Nothing was spoken aloud. There were no promises, no declarations, but the air between them became different, softer, closer. Dinners lasted longer, conversations went deeper, and the silences were no longer heavy. They became comfortable, as if they had been used to each other's presence for a very long time. Vivian noticed Marcus began arriving earlier, staying later. He brought her books he thought she would like. He asked her opinion on paintings he was considering for the estate. He even suggested she redesign the logo for one of his legitimate companies. She agreed, grateful to have something to do besides waiting for the day she would give birth. And when she worked, Marcus would sit nearby, reading or handling paperwork, as if being quiet together was enough. The moment that changed everything came on an ordinary evening. They were in the guest house living room. Vivian sat on the sofa with sketches in her hands. Marcus sat in the armchair across from her with a history book. Nothing special, just another night like the rest. Then the baby kicked, harder than ever. So hard Vivian drew in a sharp breath and pressed a hand to her belly. "What is it?" Marcus set his book down immediately, rose to his feet, worry plain on the face that was usually cold. "It's fine," Vivian said, and she smiled, a real smile. She kicked so hard. Maybe she's practicing martial arts in there. Marcus sat down beside her, closer than he had ever been, and looked at her round belly with an expression Vivian could not read. Then, as if he could not control himself, he asked in a whisper, "May I?" Vivian knew what he meant. She did not think. She only nodded. Marcus slowly placed his hand on her belly, a large, warm hand, a hand that had done terrible things, and yet it touched her now with a gentleness so deep it almost hurt. They sat there in silence, waiting. Then the baby kicked again, right beneath Marcus's palm. Vivian watched Marcus's face change. The ice melted, the hardness disappeared, and for one brief moment, he was only a man feeling life move beneath his hand. His steel-gray eyes shone, and Vivian could have sworn she saw tears gathering there. "It's incredible," he whispered, his voice rough. Vivian said nothing. She could not. Her heart was hammering, and not because of the baby, because of the man beside her, because of his closeness, because of the way he looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Then Marcus lifted his head. Their eyes met, and time seemed to stop. Only a few inches of space remained between them. His breath brushed her cheek, light and warm, and Vivian knew, with a certainty that made her dizzy, that if she leaned forward even a little, she pulled back. And Marcus did too. He withdrew his hand, stood up, and stepped away as if he had been burned. "I should go," he said, his voice returning to its usual coldness, but Vivian could hear the strain underneath. "It's late," she nodded, not trusting her voice if she tried to speak. Marcus left quickly. The door closed behind him, and Vivian sat there alone with a heart breaking for reasons completely different than before. She was falling in love with him. She knew it now. She could not deny it anymore. But who was he? A mafia boss. A killer. A man who lived in darkness. A man she could never fully belong to. Loving him was madness. It was dangerous. It was self-destruction in a new form. And Marcus, she knew, was fighting his own demons. He had lost Catherine. He had lost the child who never had a chance to be born. He had locked his heart shut for 5 years, so he would never have to endure that pain again. Opening himself to Vivian meant risking losing her, and that was something he could not survive. Two people afraid, each in their own way, two hearts aching for each other, but not daring to move closer. The boundary between them was fading, and neither of them knew what to do with it. The first pain came at 2:45 in the morning. Vivian woke with a strangled cry lodged in her throat. Both hands clamped to her belly as a contraction tore through her like a tidal wave. She lay there, gasping, trying to convince herself it was only false labor. Then the second pain hit, stronger, sharper, more brutal. And Vivian knew. Her child was demanding to be born. She reached for the call button beside the bed, and within minutes the door flew open. But it was not a servant, not a nurse. It was Marcus. He was still in his black suit, as if he had never slept at all, his face tight with tension as he saw her twisting on the bed. The baby. Vivian breathed through the pain. The baby is coming. Marcus did not say a word. He stepped forward and, gentle but decisive, lifted her up, carrying her in his arms as if she weighed no more than a feather. Vivian had no strength to protest. She could only loop her arms around his neck and fight to breathe as the pain split her body open. He took her outside, where a black car was already waiting with the engine running. Leo stood beside it, opening the rear door. But Marcus did not let him drive. He placed Vivian in the back seat, then climbed into the driver's seat himself and launched into the night. "Breathe," Marcus said, his voice strangely calm in the middle of chaos. "Look at me in the mirror and breathe. We'll be at the hospital in 10 minutes. Vivian obeyed, forcing herself to focus on those steel-gray eyes in the rearview mirror instead of the pain swallowing her whole. 10 minutes felt like 10 years, but at last they arrived. Not at a public hospital, but at a private medical facility Vivian guessed belonged to Marcus in some quiet, hidden way. Nurses and doctors were waiting, as if they had known she was coming. They transferred her onto a gurney and rushed her toward the delivery room. Everything happened like a blurred dream. Blinding lights, the steady beep of machines, the voices of doctors and nurses echoing around her. Vivian lay there, alone, in a sea of strangers. And for the first time since she entered the Castellano estate, she felt completely alone. Then she saw Marcus at the doorway of the delivery room, hesitating. He had followed her all the way here, but now he stood there as if he did not know whether he should step inside, as if crossing that threshold would drag him back into Catherine, back into the child he never got to meet. "Marcus," Vivian called, her voice thin beneath the pain. He lifted his head. Their eyes met. "Don't go. Please." Tears slid down her cheeks, mixing with sweat. "I don't have anyone else." The words hit Marcus like an arrow, piercing every wall he had built. Vivian saw the battle in his eyes, the fear, the grief. Then he stepped in. He came to her side, took her hand, and did not let go again. "I'm here," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'm not going anywhere." The hours that followed were hell and heaven woven together. The pain came and went like waves, each one stronger than the last. Vivian gripped Marcus's hand so hard she was certain she would leave bruises, but he never pulled away. He stayed, counting her breaths with her, wiping sweat from her forehead, murmuring encouragement she had never imagined he could speak. "You're strong," he said. "You can do this. I believe you." And then, after hours of agony, the doctor said the words Vivian had waited 9 months to hear. One more time. One last push. Vivian pushed with every shred of strength she had left, and the world exploded into sound. A cry, sharp, angry, glorious, the most beautiful sound she had ever heard in her life. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, and they placed a tiny, red-faced, wailing baby on Vivian's chest. Vivian looked down at her daughter's wrinkled little face, and every pain, every hardship, every loss in her life dissolved. Only love remained. Pure love, fierce love, unconditional, faith. Vivian whispered, tears pouring freely. "You are my faith." She lifted her head and looked at Marcus. He stood there, still holding her hand, and on the face that was usually ice cold, tears were sliding down. He did not hide them. He did not turn away. He simply stood there, looking at mother and child. And he cried, "Faith," he repeated, his voice breaking. "Perfect. She's perfect." And in that moment, in that delivery room filled with bright light and the sound of newborn cries, Vivian knew that everything had changed. Forever. The first weeks after Faith was born were the most wonderful and the most exhausting time of Vivian's life. The baby was like a tiny angel, with wide, round eyes and hair soft as silk. But she was also an angel who demanded attention every hour of the day and night. Faith cried every 2 hours at night. She wanted to nurse. She wanted her diaper changed. She wanted to be held. And Vivian, even though she loved her unconditionally, was still a woman who had just come through a difficult delivery, her body not fully healed. Marcus hired a night nurse, but Vivian refused to let a stranger care for her child. She wanted to do everything herself. She wanted to prove she could be a good mother even with no one beside her. But her body did not agree with her will. By the second week, Vivian was so exhausted she fell asleep in the middle of nursing. And that was when Marcus stepped in. He did not ask. He did not seek permission. He simply appeared each night after Faith began crying for the second or the third time. He gently took the baby from Vivian's arms as her hands trembled from lack of sleep. He motioned for her to lie down, and he carried Faith around the room. Vivian wanted to protest, wanted to say she could handle it, but she was too tired to open her mouth. She could only lie there and watch the most notorious mafia boss in Chicago hold her newborn daughter in his arms. And then she drifted into sleep. That night, Vivian woke at 3 a.m, not because Faith was crying, but because of the silence. The room was strangely quiet, filled only with the ticking of the clock, and one other sound. Singing. Low. Soft. Melodic. Italian. Vivian opened her eyes slowly, and what she saw made her heart stop for a beat. Marcus was sitting in the armchair by the window, where moonlight slipped through the curtains and laid a gentle glow across him. Faith lay in his arms, so small she nearly disappeared between his broad forearms, and he was singing, a lullaby in Italian, old and soothing, his deep voice rising like a whisper meant only for the night. Vivian lay still, not daring to move, afraid of breaking the moment. She watched the man the entire city feared cradle her daughter as if Faith were the most precious thing on earth. She watched the hands that had done terrible things now patting the baby's back with patient tenderness. She watched the face that was usually ice cold, now softened so completely she almost did not recognize him. And in that moment, Vivian understood a truth she had been running from for weeks. She loved him, not because he saved her, not because he gave her a place to stay, not because of wealth or power, but because of the real man beneath the mafia boss's armor. The man sitting here at 3 a.m. singing her daughter to sleep with songs that might have once been sung to him by his own mother when he was small. Marcus lifted his head, as if he felt her gaze. They looked at each other in silence, and Vivian did not try to hide what was shining clearly in her eyes. She was too tired to pretend, too tired to run. "You should go back to sleep," Marcus said softly, his voice rough. "I'll watch Faith. You don't have to do this," Vivian whispered. "I know." He looked down at Faith asleep in his arms. "But I want to." Vivian said nothing else. She only nodded, closed her eyes, and let the Italian lullaby carry her back into sleep. And as she slipped into that gentle darkness, she knew that when she woke in the morning, Marcus would still be there. He was always there. And somehow, in a way she could not fully explain, that made her feel safer than anything else she had ever known. Sofia Castellano came to visit on an afternoon when Faith was 3 weeks old. Vivian had heard Marcus mention his mother a few times. She knew this was the one woman the mafia boss truly respected, truly loved, but she did not expect the meeting to come so soon, and she did not expect it to change her life in ways she could not yet imagine. When the guest house door opened and Sofia stepped inside, Vivian knew at once that this was Marcus's mother, not because they looked alike, but because of the way she moved, the way she carried a quiet authority that needed no display. She was about 62. Her silver hair swept into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. Her face was lined with age, but her deep brown eyes were still bright, still sharp. She wore a simple black dress, elegant in its restraint, and a gold necklace with a cross pendant. "You're Vivian," she said. Not a question, a statement. Her voice was warm, but it carried the tone of someone who had lived through storms. "Marcus has told me about you." Vivian did not know how to respond. She only nodded, uneasy and nervous. She did not know what Marcus had said to his mother, did not know what this woman thought of her, a stranger who had appeared out of nowhere with a child in her belly, and who now lived under her son's protection. But Sofia did not let Vivian worry for long. Her gaze fell to the cradle where Faith was sleeping, and all the sternness drained from her face. She stepped closer, looked down at the tiny baby, and Vivian saw tears rise in her eyes. "May I hold her?" Sofia asked, her voice trembling. Vivian nodded. Sofia lifted Faith with careful hands and gathered her into her arms as if she had been doing it all her life. Faith did not cry. She shifted once, then sank back into sleep against Sofia's warmth. And Sofia stood there with tears sliding down her cheeks, looking at the baby with a kind of love Vivian had never seen in anyone except herself. "I lost my grandchild," Sofia whispered, her voice breaking. 5 years ago, along with Catherine. I thought I would never have this chance again." She lifted her head and looked at Vivian through tears. "Family isn't blood, my dear. Family is choice. And I choose this baby. I choose you." Vivian's throat tightened. Since her own parents disowned her, she had not had anyone she could call family. She had been alone for so long she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be accepted without conditions. And now this woman, a woman she had met only minutes ago, was telling her she had been chosen, that she belonged. "Thank you," Vivian whispered, and her own tears began to fall. Sofia carried Faith to the sofa and sat beside Vivian, one arm cradling the baby, the other reaching for Vivian's hand. "Marcus is my son," she said. "I know him better than anyone. I know what he has done. I know how dangerous and dark his world is. But I also know his heart." She looked at Vivian with understanding. "You're afraid of him, aren't you? Not afraid he'll hurt you. Afraid to love him." Vivian could not speak. Sophia had seen straight through her. "Don't be afraid," Sophia said gently. "Marcus has kept his heart locked ever since Catherine died. He wouldn't let himself love anyone. He wouldn't let anyone get close. But you," she smiled, the first smile Vivian had seen on her mouth. "You have done what I thought no one could do. You have brought him back to life." "I'm not sure I understand," Vivian said. "You will," Sophia replied. "Just don't run. Don't let fear choose for you." She looked down at Faith and smiled at the sleeping baby. "This little girl deserves a whole family. And Marcus, even if he never admits it, deserves happiness too." From that day on, Sophia became part of Vivian's life. She came twice a week, bringing homemade Italian food. She taught Vivian the lullabies she had once sung to Marcus when he was small. She told Vivian stories about her son's childhood. And little by little, Vivian found in Sophia what she had lost long ago. A mother, not by blood, by choice. And sometimes that is the most precious kind of family there is. 3 months had passed since Faith was born, and Vivian's life had changed in ways she never could have imagined back when she stood in the rain before the iron gates of the Castellano estate. Faith had grown bigger now, plump and precious, with her mother's clear blue eyes and sleek black hair that Vivian knew certainly hadn't come from Derek, making the child look more like a Castellano with every passing day. The baby had begun to smile, to curl her tiny fingers around an adult's hand, to recognize the faces around her. And among those faces, there was one she seemed to love most. Marcus, the ruthless Mafia boss, had melted completely in the presence of a 3-month-old child. Every evening after work, no matter how late, Marcus stopped by the guest house to see Faith. Sometimes he only stood beside the cradle, watching her sleep. Sometimes he lifted her into his arms and whispered Italian words. Vivian did not understand, but she knew in her bones they were words of love. And every time, Vivian's heart ached with a feeling she still could not bring herself to name. That night began like any other. Faith slept soundly in her cradle. Vivian sat on the sofa with a book in her hands when Marcus walked in. But something was different about him tonight. She could see it in the way he moved, in the way he looked, in the way he stood in the middle of the room as if he did not know what to do with his own body. "Marcus?" Vivian set her book down. "What's wrong?" Marcus did not answer right away. He walked to the window and stared into the darkness outside, his back to her. The silence stretched on, heavy, and Vivian began to worry. She rose and stepped closer, but she did not dare touch him. "I tried," Marcus said at last, his voice low and rough. "I tried to keep my distance. I tried to remind myself who you are, who I am, and that we could never." He stopped and drew a deep breath. "But I failed." Vivian felt her heart begin to race. "Marcus, what do you mean?" He turned, and for the first time, Vivian saw him without any mask at all. No coldness, no control, only a man standing in front of her with his heart bleeding in his hands. "I shouldn't love you," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm a killer, Vivian. There's blood on my hands. I've done things you can't even imagine. My world is darkness, violence, death. You and Faith shouldn't be near me. You deserve someone better, someone clean, someone who can give you the normal life you deserve." He stepped closer, until Vivian could feel the warmth of him. "But I can't stop," he whispered, and the steel in his gray eyes softened in a way Vivian had never seen. "I try not to think about you, but you're in every thought I have. I try not to need you, but every night I count the hours until I can see you. I try not to love you, but—" He closed his eyes, as if the feeling hurt like a wound. "But I love you. I have for a long time, and I don't know what to do with that." Vivian heard Sophia's voice in her mind. "Don't be afraid. Don't let fear choose for you." She had been right. Vivian had been afraid for too long. Afraid of being hurt again. Afraid of loving the wrong man again. Afraid of the dark world Marcus belonged to. But standing here, watching this man open himself completely in front of her, Vivian realized there was something else she feared even more. Losing him. Never knowing what they could have been. "Marcus," she said, gentle but firm, "do you think I don't know who you are? I know. I've seen the men in black suits coming and going from the estate. I've heard the sounds from the basement. I know you're not a saint." She lifted her hand and placed it against his chest, right over the place where his heart was pounding hard. "But I also know you're the man who saved me when no one else cared. You're the man who stayed with me when Faith was born. You're the man who sings my baby to sleep every night with the songs your mother sang to you. And that," Marcus, that is who you really are. She looked straight into his eyes. Without hesitation, I love you, Marcus. I have for a long time, and I'm not afraid anymore. A single beat of time passed. Then Marcus bent down, and his mouth found hers. Their first kiss was so tender Vivian almost began to cry. There was no rush, no demand. Only two mouths finding each other after far too much waiting. Marcus kissed her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, as if he feared that if he held her too tightly, she would shatter. And Vivian kissed him back with all the love she had been holding inside for months. When they finally pulled apart, forehead to forehead, breath tangled with breath, Marcus whispered, I will protect you. You and Faith. With everything I have. Vivian smiled. The first smile that carried no fear at all. I know. And in that small room, with Faith sleeping peacefully in her cradle, two broken people finally found each other. Found home. 2 weeks after their first kiss, Marcus asked Vivian and Faith to move into the main house. He did not force her. He did not give an order the way he did with everything else in his life. He simply asked, with a gentleness Vivian had come to recognize, whether she wanted to be closer to him. And Vivian, with no reason left to refuse, nodded. The room Marcus prepared for mother and child was on the second floor of the estate, right beside his own master bedroom. It was spacious, with wide windows looking out over the gardens, and it was dressed in warm colors, instead of the grim blacks that seemed to live in the bones of the mansion. Faith had her own corner, a new cradle, soft toys, a rocking chair Sophia had given them. Vivian stood there, taking it in, and for the first time she felt it in her chest, steady and real. This is home. Life inside the main house was nothing like those early days in the guest house. Vivian was not a guest anymore. She was part of this family now. Even if this family moved by rules, she was still learning how to understand. The men in black suits no longer looked at her as if she did not exist. They nodded when they passed her, opened doors for her, called her Miss Harper with unmistakable respect. And Leo, the man she had feared in the beginning, even smiled when he saw Faith, though the smile disappeared the instant someone else might notice. Marcus became Faith's father in every way that mattered. Not on paper. Not yet. But in his hands. In his care. In the love he poured into that little girl as if it were the only honest thing left in him. He was the first one to come running when Faith cried at night. He changed her diapers with the intense focus of a man treating it like the most important mission of his life. He spoke to Faith in Italian, read to her from the same books his mother had once read to him, and looked at her with an expression Vivian knew for certain. That is a father's eyes. What will she call you? Vivian asked one night as they lay beside each other, Faith asleep in her cradle nearby. Marcus was quiet for a long time. I want her to call me Papa, he finally said, so softly Vivian almost missed it. If you agree. Vivian turned toward him, cupped his cheek, and nodded. I agree. But living in Marcus's world also meant learning to accept things Vivian never imagined she would face. She learned not to ask questions when Marcus came home late, tense, the faint smell of gunpowder clinging to his clothes. She learned to pretend she did not hear the hard-edged meetings behind his office door. She learned to trust that whatever Marcus did, he did it to protect his family, to protect her, to protect Faith. And Marcus was changing too. Vivian could see it, even when he did not speak of it. Less ruthless. Leo once murmured to Sophia on an afternoon when they thought Vivian could not hear. He started forgiving small mistakes that used to be punished without mercy. He spent more time at home, came back earlier, to eat dinner with Vivian and play with Faith. He was still the Mafia boss, still the man Chicago feared. But behind these walls, inside this house, he was becoming someone else. What are you doing to me? Marcus asked one morning as they drank coffee together, Faith lying on the soft rug at their feet, kicking and cooing to herself. I don't understand, Vivian said. Marcus looked at her, then at Faith, then around the bright room filled with laughter and life. All my life, I lived in the dark, he said. I thought that was all I deserved. But then you came, with Faith, and suddenly, he shook his head, as if he could not find the right words. Suddenly I want more than that. Vivian set her cup down, walked behind him, and wrapped her arms around him. Then have more, she whispered against him. I'm here. Faith is here. We're a family now, Marcus. Family. A simple word, and yet it carried a weight that made both of them go still. And inside the gloomy Gothic mansion in the heart of Chicago, between the darkness of the underworld and the first fragile light of new love, they were building something neither of them ever believed they would have. A home, a family, a future. The proposal came on a night Vivian never expected. Faith was 6 months old now, chubby and adorable, already learning to roll over, already laughing in bright little bursts whenever she saw Marcus. They were standing in Faith's nursery, watching her sleep after a long day of play, when Marcus suddenly took Vivian's hand and turned her to face him. "Vivian," he said, his voice low, steady, serious in the way that told her he was about to say something that mattered. She looked at him, puzzled, and then Marcus did the one thing she never imagined she would see from him. He went down on one knee right there, in Faith's room, beneath the soft glow of the star-shaped nightlight, and pulled a red velvet box from the inside pocket of his suit. "I'm not good at this," he began, his voice shaking slightly, something Vivian had never heard from this man before. "I don't have pretty words like in the movies. I only know that before I met you, I was just existing. But since you and Faith, I've started living. Really living." He opened the box. A diamond ring caught the light and flashed like a promise. "Vivian Harper," he said, looking up at her with a hope that made his steel-gray eyes look almost vulnerable. "Will you marry me? Will you let me become Faith's legal father? Will you let us be a real family officially, completely?" Tears were already streaming down Vivian's face before she realized she was crying. She looked at the man kneeling in front of her, Chicago's most feared mafia boss now staring up at her with the anxious, earnest expression of a boy waiting to be chosen. She looked at Faith asleep in her crib, the daughter Vivian had fought to protect when the world abandoned them, now on the edge of having a father. And she looked inward, to the place in her heart where the answer had been waiting for a long time. "Yes," she whispered then, louder, breathless, and sure. "Yes, Marcus, I will." Marcus rose to his feet, slid the ring onto her finger, and pulled her into his arms as if he was afraid she would disappear the moment he let go. They stood there in their daughter's room, holding each other and crying, two broken people who had somehow found the pieces that fit. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, in the small church where Marcus's parents had been married nearly 40 years earlier. Not a grand affair with hundreds of guests, not the lavish spectacle people expected from a man with Marcus Castellano's power. Just Sophia, Leo, a handful of Marcus's closest men and, most importantly, Faith. 6 months old, in a tiny pink dress, asleep in Nonna Sophia's arms, Vivian wore a simple white gown. There was no father to walk her down the aisle, her own had disowned her long ago. But she didn't ache for that anymore. When she stepped into the church and saw Marcus waiting at the end of the aisle, dressed in black, looking at her as if she were the most miraculous thing he'd ever been given, Vivian knew she already had everything she needed. Their vows were simple, but they landed like truth. Marcus vowed to protect Vivian and Faith with everything he had. Vivian vowed to stand beside him in both light and shadow. And when the priest pronounced them husband and wife, when Marcus kissed her in front of the only people who truly mattered, Vivian felt as if her life had finally become whole. But the wedding wasn't the most important part of that day. The most important part came afterward. They went to court to finalize the adoption. Marcus had arranged everything in advance. His lawyer had first restored Vivian's legal identity, and then handled the paperwork, the appointments, every detail. And by the end of the day, Faith Harper became Faith Castellano. Vivian stared at her daughter's new birth certificate, at the line labeled, "Father," where Marcus Castellano's name was now written, and she cried again. This was the thing she once believed would never happen. The little girl whose biological father wouldn't even look at her now had a man willing to die to protect her. Faith Castellano, daughter of Chicago's most notorious mafia boss, one of the most loved babies in the world. "Thank you," Vivian whispered to Marcus as they walked out of the courthouse, Faith asleep in his arms. Marcus kissed her forehead. "You don't have to thank me. This is my family now. You're my wife. Faith is my daughter, and I'll spend the rest of my life protecting you both." Vivian leaned her head against his shoulder, looking at their sleeping child, and for the first time in her life she truly understood what the word family meant. 1 year had passed since the wedding day, and Vivian's life felt like a dream she still did not dare to believe was real. Faith was 18 months old now, unsteady on her feet as she learned to walk, babbling her first words, and the word she said most often was, "Papa." Each time that clear, bright call rang out, each time Faith toddled toward Marcus on legs that had not yet found their strength, each time the little girl looped her arms around his neck and burst into giggles, Vivian felt as if her heart might split open from sheer happiness. Marcus, the mafia boss the entire city feared, melted completely in the face of his tiny daughter. He could be in the middle of a meeting with the most dangerous men in Chicago. Yet the moment Faith called, "Papa," he would stop everything and hurry to her. Sophia came to visit every week, bringing new toys and sweet little outfits for her granddaughter. She taught Faith Italian songs, and told her the fairy tales she used to tell Marcus when he was a boy. The gloomy Gothic mansion that once seemed so dark now overflowed with a child's laughter and the warmth of a real family. And then, 2 months ago, Vivian discovered she was pregnant again. This time, it was Marcus's child, his own flesh and blood. When she told him, Marcus stood there in silence for a long moment, his eyes shimmering with tears, and then he pulled her into his arms and cried like a child. He had once lost a baby before it ever had the chance to be born, along with Catherine. Now life was offering him a second chance, and he could not believe he was lucky enough to be given it. Vivian laid a hand on her belly, where a small life was steadily growing. 4 months from now, Faith would have a little brother or sister. Their family would have one more member. Everything was so perfect, so beautiful, that sometimes Vivian would wake in the middle of the night and have to look over at Marcus sleeping beside her, just to be certain it was all real. That afternoon was an ordinary afternoon, like so many others. Vivian was sitting in the living room, watching Faith play with her wooden blocks, when the doorbell rang. She did not think much of it, perhaps a delivery, one of Marcus's visitors, or maybe Sophia arriving earlier than planned. But then she heard Leo's voice outside, tense and alert in a way she had never heard before. "You're not allowed in here. I have the right. That's my daughter." That voice. Vivian froze in place, as if the blood in her veins had stopped moving. She knew that voice. She had tried to forget it for more than 2 years, but it still haunted her in her nightmares. Derek. She stood up and moved to the window to look out, and just as she feared, Derek Mitchell was there, standing at the gate of the mansion, dressed in an expensive suit and wearing the smug expression she had once hated with a burning intensity. He stared straight into the security camera as though he knew she was watching, and the smile on his lips made Vivian shudder. Faith ran to her, tugging at her mother's dress, babbling, "Mama, Mama." Vivian lifted her up, holding her close, and for the first time in more than a year, she felt that absolute terror return. The ghost of the past had come looking for her, and she did not know whether, this time, the happiness she had built would be strong enough to withstand it. Marcus was home 15 minutes after Leo called. Vivian had never seen him move that fast, had never seen his face set into anything so hard and raw with such primal rage. He walked into the living room where she sat with Faith in her arms, looked at her for a single second to make sure mother and child were both all right, then turned to Leo, his voice cold as ice. "Where is he?" "Still at the gate," Leo answered. "I didn't let him in. He says he won't leave until he sees Vivian and the little girl. I have redid." Marcus nodded, turning as if to step back outside, but Vivian rose and caught his hand. "I want to hear what he has to say," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I need to know what he wants." Marcus looked at her, those steel-gray eyes filled with worry and anger. "You don't need to face him. I'll handle it." "I know you will, but I need to do this. This is my past. I have to face it myself." A taut silence fell between them. Then Marcus nodded, even though he clearly did not want to. He handed Faith to Sophia, who had come as soon as she heard, then took Vivian's hand and walked outside with her. Derek stood there beyond the iron gate, dressed in an expensive dark blue suit, a gleaming gold watch on his wrist. He looked different from the Derek Vivian remembered, a little heavier, far more smug, and when he saw her step out beside Marcus, the smile on his mouth spread even wider. "Vivian," Derek said, his voice sweet in a way that was plainly false. "You look so much better than the last time I saw you. Seems life as a mafia boss's wife suits you." Vivian felt Marcus go rigid at her side, his hand tightening around hers until she could sense the fury boiling inside him. But he said nothing. He simply stood there, a wall between her and the man at the gate. "What do you want, Derek?" Vivian asked, straight to the point. Derek shrugged, as if the answer were obvious. "I want to see my daughter. I have that right, you know. I'm her biological father. You gave up that right when you told me to get an abortion." Vivian shot back, her voice flat with cold. "When you vanished and left me alone to face everything. Faith was legally adopted. You have nothing to do with her anymore." Derek laughed, and the sound made Vivian feel sick. About that, I spoke with my lawyer. Turns out an adoption can be challenged if the biological father never officially relinquished his rights, and I don't recall signing any paperwork." He tilted his head, eyes sharp with calculation. "I can sue for custody, drag this through court for years. The press will love the story about the mafia boss's wife kidnapping the daughter of an honest citizen." Marcus took one step forward, and Vivian saw Derek flinch back, fear flashing across his face for the first time. But he recovered quickly, perhaps because he knew the security cameras were recording everything, and Marcus could not do anything to him here. "Or," Derek went on, "we can handle this like civilized people. $5 million. I'll sign away every right to the child and disappear forever. With Mr. Castellano's wealth, That's pocket change. Vivian felt as if someone had punched her in the stomach. This was why Derek had come back. Not to see Faith, not from some belated surge of fatherly love, but for money, for greed. He had looked into her life, found out who she married, and decided to use his own daughter to extort them. Marcus opened his mouth, and Vivian knew he was about to say something they would regret. She tightened her grip on his hand, pulling him back. "Don't," she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. "Don't give him an excuse." Then she turned to Derek, her voice cold as steel. "We will not pay you a single cent. If you want to sue, then sue. We'll see you in court." Derek lifted his eyebrows, startled by her resolve. "Are you sure? Court can be expensive and exhausting, especially for a pregnant woman." Vivian did not blink. "I've survived worse than you, Derek, and I have something you don't. The truth." Derek studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. "Fine. You want to do it the hard way. My lawyer will be in touch." He turned to leave, but paused and looked back at Marcus. "I hope you know how to restrain yourself, Mr. Castellano. If anything happens to me, everyone will know where to look." When Derek walked away, Marcus stood there trembling with rage. Vivian turned to him and placed both hands against his chest. "Look at me," she said. "You can't handle him your way. Not this time. If you do anything to him, you'll lose everything. You'll lose me. You'll lose Faith. You'll lose the baby I'm carrying. Oris, he threatened my family," Marcus growled, his voice thick with lethal intent. "Then let the law handle it. I have evidence. I have the messages where he told me to get an abortion. I have the record of him abandoning us. We'll win, Marcus, but you have to let me do this the right way." Marcus closed his eyes, drew a deep breath, then opened them to look at her. The anger was still there, but he was holding it back. For her, for Faith, for their family. "Fine," he said, his voice rough. "We do it your way. But if he dares lay a hand on you or Faith, then you'll do what you have to do," Vivian finished for him. "I know, but give me the chance to fight this my way first." Marcus nodded, pulled her into his arms, and they stood there for a long, quiet moment, the two of them against the world, bracing themselves for the battle ahead. The weeks that followed became a nightmare Vivian could not wake from. Marcus hired the best legal team money could buy, attorneys who specialized in complicated cases and were willing to fight to the bitter end. They began gathering evidence, digging through every text message, every email, every bank record, to prove that Derek had completely abandoned Vivian and the child she had been carrying more than 2 years earlier. The old messages Vivian had kept, Derek's harsh, icy words, now became their most important weapons. "Get an abortion or get out," was the line Marcus's lawyer flagged, saying it would be the deciding proof in court. But Derek was not that easy. He knew he could not win with the truth, so he chose to play dirty. 2 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, the tabloids started running sensational stories with headlines like, "Mafia boss's wife kidnaps the daughter of an honest citizen, and baby held captive in a criminal's mansion." Derek appeared on television, eyes red, voice shaking as he talked about being blocked from seeing his daughter for nearly 2 years, about how he feared for the child's safety living in a mafia environment. He played the victim perfectly, and the public, people who did not know the truth, began to side with him. Vivian tried not to read those articles, not to watch those television segments, but they were everywhere. Every time she opened her phone, every time she passed a newsstand, Derek's face and his lies hit her again. People who had once been friends, people she had known from her old life, started reaching out, not to check on her, but to ask whether she had really kidnapped the baby. The judgment in their eyes, the poisonous curiosity in their voices, made Vivian want to scream that they did not know anything at all. The stress began to affect the pregnancy. Vivian could barely sleep, she had no appetite, and her doctor started to worry about her blood pressure. In the 5th month, she was admitted to the hospital for one night because of unusual contractions. Marcus sat by her bed the entire night, gripping her hand, his face full of worry and guilt. He blamed himself for not being able to protect her from all of this, for letting her suffer while he was fully capable of making Derek disappear forever. "Let me handle him," Marcus said that night, his voice low and lethal. "One call. He will never bother you again." Vivian shook her head. Even though she was so exhausted, she almost did not have the strength to argue. "No, Marcus. If you do that, you will become exactly what they are saying you are, and I will lose you." She tightened her hold on his hand. "I can endure this. We will win the right way. I believe that." Today, Marcus closed his eyes, his jaw clenched, and Vivian knew he was fighting himself. All his life he had solved problems with violence and power, but now, for her, for Faith, for the baby inside her, he had to restrain that instinct. He had to put his faith in a system he had never trusted. Sophia came to help, caring for Faith and Vivian while Marcus dealt with meetings with the lawyers. She cooked nourishing meals for Vivian, sat beside her when she cried, and reminded her that she, too, had once had to fight in this world. "I was once a boss's wife," Sophia said. "I know what it feels like to be judged by a world that understands nothing about you. But I also know the truth wins in the end. You have to believe that." As he free, Faith, too young to understand what was happening, still ran through the mansion with her bright laughter, still called Marcus Papa every time he came home, still hugged Vivian every night before she fell asleep. Looking at her daughter, Vivian reminded herself why she had to keep fighting. This was not only about her, it was about Faith's future, about the right to grow up with parents who loved her, about refusing to let a man like Derek have any power over the child's life. The preliminary hearing was set for 2 weeks from now, and even though she was exhausted, even though she was afraid, even though the strain felt almost unbearable, Vivian prepared to step into the greatest battle of her life. Not alone, but with Marcus at her side, with Sophia supporting her, with Faith as the reason she would never give up. The day of the final hearing arrived on a crisp autumn morning. Vivian wore a simple, deep blue dress, her 6-month belly already quite pronounced, and Marcus stood beside her in his familiar black suit, his hand clasping hers with the quiet weight of a promise. The courtroom was packed, not only with lawyers from both sides, but with reporters too, and onlookers hungry to see how a case between a feared mafia boss and a man claiming to be a victim would end. Derek sat on the opposite side, still wrapped in that smug, manufactured confidence, yet Vivian noticed the way he kept glancing at her, a nervousness he tried to hide. The hearing began with the same familiar arguments. Derek's attorney continued to paint a picture of a pitiable father kept from his child, an innocent man threatened by mafia power. But then it was Vivian's lawyer's turn, and the air in the room began to shift. Evidence was introduced piece by piece. Bank records showed Derek had not sent a single dollar of support throughout the pregnancy, nor after Faith was born. Witnesses from their old circle confirmed Derek had openly said he did not want the baby. And then came the most important evidence of all, projected onto the large screen at the front of the courtroom. Text message, cold, ruthless lines. Derek had sent Vivian more than 2 years earlier, appeared in plain sight for everyone to read. "Get an abortion or get out. I don't want anything to do with you or that thing in your belly. Don't contact me again." The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Vivian watched Derek's face drain of color. She saw his lawyer lower his head, as if he already knew it was over. Reporters began hammering at their keyboards, and Vivian understood that tomorrow the papers would have a very different story to tell. The judge demanded an explanation from Derek, and for the first time, he had nothing to offer. He stammered, scrambling for excuses, talking about how he had been young then, frightened, not ready. But the judge was not persuaded. She was a hard woman with sharp eyes, and she had seen through Derek's lies long before this moment. The ruling came late in the afternoon. The judge declared that Derek Mitchell had fully abandoned his responsibilities as a father before the child was ever born, that he had no right to claim anything over a child he had refused, that Marcus Castellano's adoption was entirely legal and could not be challenged. Derek lost every right to Faith, was barred from approaching for 10 years, and a protective order was issued for both Vivian and her daughter. When the judge's gavel struck, Vivian broke into tears, and Marcus pulled her into his arms right there in the courtroom, unconcerned with the dozens of eyes fixed on them. They won. They truly won. After the hearing, when the room had emptied and the reporters had finally gone, Marcus told Vivian he needed to handle a little paperwork with the attorneys and would meet her at the car. Vivian nodded, too exhausted and too happy to question it. But she did not know that Marcus did not go to meet the lawyers. He went to find Derek. He found him in the underground parking garage, trying to slip away before anyone recognized him. When Derek turned and saw Marcus standing there, his face went white as paper. "Mr. Castellano," Derek stammered, backing up a step. "The court has ruled. I won't bother you anymore. I swear. It's quite now." Marcus walked toward him, slowly, one measured step at a time, until he stood close enough to feel the other man's breath. He did not touch Derek. He did not threaten him with violence. He only looked at him, with steel gray eyes colder than anything Derek had ever seen. "I'm going to say this once, and only once," Marcus said, his voice low, and even in a way that was terrifying. "If you come near my wife again, if you come near my daughter again, if I hear your name in any context connected to my family, No court in this world will ever find you. Do you understand? Derek nodded frantically, sweat sliding down his forehead. He understood. He understood that this was not a threat. This was a fact. Marcus turned and walked away without looking back. And Derek Mitchell, the man who abandoned Vivian when she needed him most, disappeared from Chicago that very night. No one ever heard a word about him again. No one cared. Anthony Castellano was born on an early winter night, 3 months after the court case ended. This time, everything was completely different from the day Faith was born. There was no fear, no loneliness, no dread about what the future might bring. Vivian lay in the delivery room of the finest private hospital in Chicago, Marcus gripping her hand through every wave of labor. And when their son's first cry filled the air, they both cried with him. Anthony was Marcus's mirror image, from the thick black hair to the sharp steel gray eyes. When the doctor placed the baby on Vivian's chest, she looked down at that tiny face and saw the future of her family, a future she had never dared to dream of when she stood in the rain outside the iron gates of the Castellano estate nearly 3 years earlier. Sophia was the first to arrive after Anthony was born, carrying Faith in her arms. The 2-year-old stared at her baby brother with wide, wondering eyes, then pointed and said, "Baby, my baby." Vivian laughed through her tears as Faith carefully pressed a kiss to Anthony's forehead, exactly the way Marcus kissed Vivian every night before sleep. Sophia stood beside them, tears streaming down her cheeks, but they were tears of pure, overwhelming joy. She had lost her first grandchild along with Catherine 5 years earlier. Now she had 2 grandchildren, a whole family, and a daughter-in-law she loved like her own flesh and blood. The months that followed brought even more change. Marcus began to step back into the background, handing many daily responsibilities over to Leo and other trusted men. He was still the boss, still the head of the empire his father had built, but he no longer gave 12 hours a day to the business. Instead, he came home early to have dinner with his family, to read to Faith before bed, to carry Anthony out into the garden for walks while Vivian rested. He was learning how to be a father, a husband, an ordinary man, even if his life could never be entirely ordinary. Vivian watched those changes and felt her heart fill with gratitude. She knew Marcus would never completely leave the world he belonged to. She knew the darkness was still there, waiting at the edges of their lives. But she also knew the light they had built together was strong enough to drive back any shadow. They had Faith. They had Anthony. They had Sophia. They had a family they had both once believed they would never have. One evening, as the whole family sat in the living room, Faith played on the rug with her wooden blocks. Anthony slept soundly in Marcus's arms, and Vivian leaned her head on her husband's shoulder with a satisfied sigh. She remembered the stormy night years ago. She remembered the despair as she collapsed at the iron gates. She remembered the fear as she woke inside a Mafia mansion. She had thought her life ended there. She had thought she had nothing left to lose, but it turned out that was only the beginning. Marcus kissed her hair and murmured, "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about how life can change," Vivian said. "About how the most wonderful things sometimes come from the darkest moments." Marcus nodded, looking down at Anthony asleep, then at Faith, giggling as she managed to stack a tall tower. "You saved me," he said, his voice low and sincere. "You, and Faith, and Anthony. You gave me a reason to live, not just exist. Everyone. We saved each other," Vivian corrected, and she knew it was the truth. Vivian had knocked on the gates of hell and found heaven. She had stepped into darkness and found light. She had lost everything, and received back more than she had ever dared to hope for. And every day, when she woke beside the man she loved, when she watched her 2 children growing up in love, she knew her painful journey had led her to the most worthy destination. That is the lesson this story wants to send to all of you. No matter how deeply life pushes you into the abyss, no matter how lonely and hopeless you may feel, never give up hope. Sometimes a door closes only so another door can open. Sometimes strangers become family. And sometimes the greatest happiness comes from the places you least expect. Family is not always the people who share your blood, but the people who choose to stand by you, love you, and fight for you. If this story has touched your heart, please take a second to subscribe to our channel, hit like, and share this video so more people can hear meaningful stories every day. We would truly love to know how you feel about Vivian and Marcus's journey. Have you ever lived through moments of despair and then found the light? Do you believe love can change a person? Share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. We always want to listen to the stories from deep in your hearts. Thank you for staying with us until the end of the story. We wish everyone watching this video abundant health, a joyful life, and a peaceful spirit each day. Remember, even when darkness closes in, light is always somewhere, waiting for you. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.